So good afternoon. This is Waukesha Howe, Community Champion, here with my co-host Ms. Terrell, and we are about to have a conversation with the candidate for District 1, which is Miss Katie Howard. So Katie, we got a icebreaker for you. Before I get into that though, I just want to get this little disclaimer out there. We are not bought and paid by anyone. These are just moms and community members who are having a conversation with candidates. And so with that, I'm gonna give you this good icebreaker.
Like
Um
it. Yeah.
what did you have to give up to achieve your current level of success?
Ooh, it's a great question. Um, Definitely some control. I like to control things in my life sometimes, and you got to let a lot of that go and just go with the flow. And a free time, but I love what I do. So, when it's something you love, it's not work and it's my passion. But I set my boundaries too and do things with my family and prioritize them. But yeah, I think control is one thing you have to acknowledge you're going to need to let go when you go into public service. But yeah, great question.
Yeah, that is so true. Like, and I can't vouch. You'll set boundaries. You'll be like, listen, I'm gonna do this, and then this where I'm gonna stop. And that's very important because not often do people who serve others get to do that. They just be going and going. So that's really dope to have those boundaries to be able to stop and go when it's needed. So I appreciate that. So we're gonna open it up. So tell us about you, where you from, how we got here, and what you running for.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for having me. I love these kinds of conversations. Um, so yes, I am the representative for Board of Education District 1. I'm finishing up 2 big years in my seat. As people know, this is a staggering of the board. And that meant that the odd years have to run after 2 years. So since I don't have opposition, I am looking forward to serving 4 more years. That doesn't mean I'm not going to work for it right now. And I love having these conversations. My Board of Education district has Carver High School, Maynard Jackson High School, Midtown High School. It is a wonderful cross section of communities and schools. Midtown, and also now I have a part of Virginia Highlands with redistricting. That is something important to let people know. You are voting based on the new city maps for the new council districts, and the Board of Education seats are made up for the district seats of a combination of the council districts. So I am essentially council districts 1 and 2. So part of Virginia Highlands, Midtown, Old Fourth Ward, Grant Park, Ormwood. Unfortunately, I lost some of Brown's Mill, like right at the cutoff. I'm losing Dobbs, which is hard for me. Definitely still have Thomasville, which I love very much. South Atlanta, Lakewood Heights. So it's a great cross section of communities. I myself am a proud APS grad, having gone to then Grady and graduated in 1996. So I was so fortunate to go to school with a mix of kids and communities from Ansley Park to Techwood Homes. And that helped form who I am today. I'm the product of a mother who did a lot of work in school. She's a social worker, still is today because she never retire. And just, she showed me the example of being invested and involved in your schools and wanting the best for every student, every family. It was definitely never just about me. She did the work because she cared about her community schools. I've been involved in the Maynard Jackson cluster for, over a decade now. I have twins who are at Maynard Jackson in 10th grade. They went to King, they went to Parkside. And it's been about, for me, bringing community support around all our schools. And the Jackson cluster also has a great mix of families and communities and just supporting all our schools and knowing the importance of going to school together and putting that out to the community too, to remind them the value of that. So yes, all that combined drove me to run for school board, to work hard to improve outcomes for all students. And I believe in the system. we are a system that is rich in resources and people and beautiful communities and a lot of rich history in APS, or City of Atlanta and APS, which again, I'm a proud product of. And how we never forget that and build off of that, but going forward, how we also change to do things differently that really meet the needs of our kids.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And it sounds like you homegrown.
I'm homegrown.
So let me ask you this. The last 2 years, what have you seen is some of the biggest needs for the children and families in your district?
Absolutely want to address this question. For Board of Education District 1 and throughout the city, we all know that the increase in property values and the cost of living is a huge burden on our families, and it's growing rapidly. So just the number of evictions that families are facing, people who have been here a long time, the struggle to afford to stay here, and how that affects our schools. Number one is students and families and not having that stability and just having to deal with that stress and trauma in your life constantly. And then we're seeing it affect, obviously, the populations in our schools, the numbers in our schools, the mobility, violence that is taking our kids. And we know it's a crisis here in the city and as well as the nation, that we have more guns than people, and the reality of that impact for kids who are in circumstances that are out of their control, and the pull of those factors like gangs and things like that. I mean, these are real things that are affecting our students and absolutely affect their ability to learn to the fullest potential. I am absolutely focused on making sure we have the best curriculum in place with evidence-based approaches like the science of reading, and approaches that support that type of teaching in the classroom. But we also know that if a kid is not in school, if they're coming to school and they don't have like clean clothes, or they haven't had enough to eat, or they're late, or they're tired, like all those things affect our kids' ability to learn. And we have to be real about approaching those issues and putting in place things that can remove some of those barriers for our students and our families. And we have a lot of great partnerships and people who can help in that work. So those are the things I've seen be the biggest issues for families in Board of Education District 1 and throughout APS. I care deeply about my constituents, but I'm here, as all board members are, to serve all students in the system.
Right. Well, you actually answered my other question, which was okay. What have you done surrounding the issues you just talked about, and what partnerships have you brought to APS? Were you able to bring on some additional partnership that can tackle, the violence, the cost of living? Because I'm in District 1 too. I know for sure it's the hardest hit one, because it affects everybody, no matter if you are well-to-do or not. Like, it's just really taking a toll. So what are some other things that you've done and some other partners you've been able to bring to APS to help all of the families and children?
Yeah, because nobody can do it alone, and we absolutely rely on our partners. So my approach has been to really understand what is working in the community. I get frustrated when entities start to layer on things without knowing what's really working. And I've been fortunate, as you know, in my day job, to be connected with folks who are doing a lot of the work on the ground, especially around violence interruption and prevention. Cure Violence, has been in place for a long time. They're doing work. I mean, they have some continual ebb and flow in the work, connecting with them and folks in CRIS 180, which we do have therapists and others working with our kids with CRIS 180, but they're, folks on the ground really doing intentional work to support our students who are most at risk. So leaning in and getting to know the work they're doing and sharing that feedback back with the district. And when we're having conversations around our kids' needs, our students' needs, what is the data showing us from these partnerships and working with folks? And also, where are the gaps? Even the DA's office they've got some grants through the Department of Justice and some other groups where they are really actively going into schools. They're working with Fulton County schools right now to make sure kids never get into the system. But they have some really authentic messengers working with students, especially around the impact and influence of gangs. And again, sharing that feedback back with the district, things I'm seeing that are working and partners who are actively making a difference, making sure the district is really taking in that information and knowing I don't have the subject matter expertise to make a decision as to how we work with folks and who we work with exactly, but providing that feedback back always. Yes, the city of Atlanta is one of them too. I've been seeing for a long time how people have been working in their own silos and sometimes competing over children, which makes no sense. They're all our kids. And I've really appreciated seeing the traction between the city of Atlanta and APS working collaboratively, especially like, for instance, in the APS Now newsletter, there is information on Rec Center Fall Camp. Yes, during fall break, they will have camps, and we're just sharing that information. That should be a no-brainer, but I'm glad it's actively happening. Of course, there's been some work around sharing of facilities like pools. And now I think we're getting to a point where we really need to hone in on how we can best leverage and maximize our resources. For instance, I've been approached by organizations like the East Atlanta Kids Club, and they have kids from Parkside, they have kids from Burgess, they have kids from other schools, but those two in particular, how can we work with APS to even get kids transported there in the afternoon with school buses? But these are things I take back to the district to say, are we really, looking at all our partners? Are we doing that deep dive needs assessment to know, how do we best work together to serve our kids outside of school, because that's critically necessary. And also, I'll just throw out there, even though this is operations and the board has to vote on it legally because we have to, but we do need to help steer it in the right direction appropriately. Just us moving forward on the 16 properties that have been deemed excess and supporting them being used for quality, affordable, mixed housing, income housing, especially when it comes to our educators and staff in APS. I think that's a big move in the right direction to work with partners in that work to really create those much needed developments, middle to kind of bigger to smaller. So those are several examples of how I'm pushing in as a board member and helping create, I hope, some other opportunities and being supportive as a board member.
Let me ask you this, because you spoke about those resources, and I just learned about in the joint committee meeting. Do you serve on that committee?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so the juvenile, I don't know if that's the courts or someone, but they have a lot of resources, like you were just saying. They're working with Fulton County, but they were saying that they have not been able to get the MOU to kind of get into APS and start working. Are you and the board willing to move that along after y'all heard that in that conversation?
I've shared that with Dr. Battle, and I know she has a meeting with them, I think week after next. So, it's about execute. It requires someone to look at it and figure out what's going on, either what's the holdup or maybe how do we set this up best. But I think we can, I will just say it out loud. I really appreciate Dr. Battle coming in, hitting the ground running. And she's about executing on some things, but she's going to do it, after evaluating things, which need to be done. So
yeah, big kudos for getting Dr. Battle to come in at a crucial time and being able to she got to make some things happen, and I know she'll do it in these next couple of months. I really appreciate you guys for that. And I'm happy to hear that she's going to meet with them, because when I heard about it, it was like, well, it's just it's like maybe on a desk somewhere, or just sign the MOU and we good to go with APS. And I'm like, we need those resources in Atlanta, not just District 1, but Atlanta really bad. And if it's working down in Fulton County, let's see if we can get it up here and get it working for our babies. So I most definitely believe Dr. Battle would most definitely get that ball rolling for sure. So I really do appreciate you lifting it up. Let me ask you this, and I'm gonna turn it over to Miss Sherelle. Is there any housing resources that you know of between the city and Atlanta that we can be sharing to make sure families know? I did hear something about maybe some possible funding that's coming for evictions. Um, but is it any other housing resources that could be coming online to help with the housing situation we have here? Crisis, really.
Absolutely. I am happy to follow up with a really inclusive list that I actually have, but I can't rattle off for you. But I always encourage people, and I get frustrated that a lot of stuff is online. That kind of drives me crazy. But I mean, people can call 211 United Way and find out a lot. But Invest Atlanta is an excellent resource. Going to them also for legacy residents, especially with home repair. I mean, there are seniors who are hopefully voting for me too, so I'm looking out for them as well. We want a cross-generational population in the city. We want our seniors who help build the city and APS to be able to stay here. So I always put that out. They have a lot of things they're steering towards legacy residents. The Beltline also, they're putting in place some programs for legacy residents, and working to help connect people with resources, considering the fact, of course, the Beltline has helped increase property values.
Yep.
So yes, and overall, I mean, also if someone feels like, anytime they have questions about issues with landlords, leases, legal aid, Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, all those places are great resources for more information. And I can send you with phone numbers.
Yeah, send me that, because I know those two organizations, I work with them in a separate space. And I know they have resources. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they have a partnership with Atlanta Public Schools.
They're actually in some of our schools. Okay. AVLF is actually in some of our schools. They're a great example. Like they're at Carver, they're in the Carver cluster. They should be in the Mays cluster and Doug to some extent. But they actually do work really well with schools to identify families who really need to talk with them and have that need, which is excellent.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. Miss Sherelle, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. Hi, Miss Sherelle. I know we spoke at the beginning, but
no, I want to say thank you for your willingness to share with the community your position and your hopes and aspirations and desires for to not only just your district, but to all the kids, or I should say all the children, students in APS. So thank you, because I know it takes a lot, and when we're talking about it, we're trying to make it trivial or minuscule, but it's not. What you're doing is very much appreciated, and it's a lot. So I want you to know that first up.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No, I really mean that. I was looking at your I think it might have been a bio of yours, and it says that I was raised by my mother, who taught me the true value of investing in community public schools, and that it is never just about one child, but all children. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, I like that one. It is a lesson that is at the core of why I want to take my experience to the next level and serve our students and families on the board. Having said, how would you spend your next term serving the students and families of District 1?
Great question. And you point out also that I need to shift my bio to say,
I know that, but I mean, I thought it still was applicable.
I believe all the beginning that
exactly.
That absolutely current and always will be. And my mother absolutely did. But it's something, I've definitely lived and nurtured and cultivated myself. and the work I've done in my kids' schools and just supporting the entire Jackson cluster and now all schools in APS. So what I'm really looking forward to doing in this next term is focusing in on how we shift and pivot to support our kids who are struggling the most. And that is transformative work for boards throughout the nation. It is a shift from, the way we've been doing things and kind of increasing some things to, okay, how do we really recognize in action that we cannot do everything? Because we can't. No one entity or person can. So how do we take the resources we have and really focus in on the kids who are struggling the most? Because when you do that, you put in place approaches and strategies that really benefit all children. But you've got to be real and accept, what are harsh realities. Looking at our literacy rates for Black males, looking for families who are not as resources to others financially. Like, we have got to pivot what we've been doing to address those needs. And that means adjusting in other places. It does. And that's a reality. My job is to hone in on that, to make sure we have a goal with my colleagues that reflects those needs, and holding a superintendent accountable with support. I mean, summing it all up, even though that isn't simple, it takes a lot of engagement with the community to first, also understand, like, what is reality for you? What is happening for your students? And I hear a lot of it, and I share it back, and some things have shifted and some things have not. Another reason we've changed leadership. But it's not about just, changing leadership and burning through that. It's about how are we as a board, and our job as governance, setting these goals that really address our needs, and then making sure that we have a budget that's aligned with those needs, and we're supporting a superintendent doing that work. And that means also letting the superintendent do their work, which they're the ones who implement, they set the strategy and implement it and execute. We hold them accountable and checking them on a continual basis. So that's really where I'm focusing in. Literacy, numeracy, and literacy. We all know every child has to be able to read to do everything. And we have to make sure we're teeing it up in the beginning. So some of the things were called out Monday, which have been on my list, which it was really good to hear from the superintendent and team. Some of the barriers that we know are affecting our students from being able to read on grade level, attendance. We have a newer staff. We have newer educators who need to have continual professional development, as do all our educators, in the strategies and curriculum we're using that we see working. And also the importance of pre-K and early education. Like, we say these things, but then our numbers don't reflect that that's our focus. And it's going to take us really intentionally working with partners doing this work, expanding it in a way that is realistic and doable, and then going out to the community and explaining why these things are important and bringing people along. Because just having a pre-K class doesn't mean people are putting their kids in pre-K. It takes a lot of work to really build that. So I really focus in on that work with our goals and our guardrails and student outcomes focused governance, because it grounds us in the work. But for me, it's taking it up a serious notch to say, okay, what does this mean in terms of action? We have a lot of motion, but what's the actual action to move the needle for kids? Because the data doesn't lie.
Right.
I mean, it's not sometimes breaking down every little thing going on for a student, but it's giving us a really good picture. And everyone has good intentions, and that's important, but we've really got to put the action behind it. And I'm looking forward to drilling in on that work. And of course, a new superintendent will be a huge part of that and helping make that decision.
Oh, you hit on so many great points, and taking my mind in so many different directions. And education is just not a one-all fit-all. And so, So I'm going to try to bring me in. So I guess I'll start here. Then I'm going to come back. So I've got to put myself a mental note. But it's believed that that it is the world's desire not to again experience a global pandemic such as COVID-19. The pandemic highlighted the ugly truths of the educational system, the unique needs of students, and the often overlooked challenges of teachers, the unheard voices of students and their families, and it definitely told the stories of many unsung sheroes and heroes teachers. It captured disparities relating to education, health, communities, and economic wealth. As a sitting board member, and your next 4 years, I want you to tell the community what were the challenges that you bear witness to, and what concrete plans will you bring to the table that would assist your colleagues in their efforts to address the lingering challenges that we face from that pandemic.
Yes, the pandemic brought to light so many things we already knew and just exacerbated those issues. And coming in kind of, I mean, the pandemic's not over. The impacts will last
right
a long time. But coming, kind of in the tail end of some things, just seeing, the reality of kids not being in school. And I fully recognize that some students did really well in a virtual environment, and we can never forget that. And ABA, being present and supporting those students and educating them is a great option. And also knowing that and looking at preparation for college or career and post-graduation readiness, making sure we're meeting our students where they are and providing them some opportunities to get their diploma and learn to the highest level through online or Phoenix Academy. Like, having those options are very important, especially for students who are working and have other things going on in a different learning environment. But for so many kids being out of school and out of that socialization, especially middle schoolers, like we are seeing that in middle school now. I mean, it was a hard time for them not to have that social interaction. And our educators were traumatized. They lost family members. They were hit. So that trauma continues. And how I focus in on addressing that is, again, like making sure we are understanding the realities for all our families and students. We are listening to students. We are listening to educators. We have a guardrail around that, climate and culture, and steering that to what we've really got to do to get that feedback, and then taking it and doing something with it. Is it, we say, one thing we have done, here's an example, is mental health days. Educators now have 2 mental health days they can take. That's great. And I think that came from getting that feedback and actually implementing something. Mm-hmm. And we need to be measuring, how did that impact educators? Like, did that work? And if it did, keep it, potentially scale it, and really making sure we're focusing in on those things. I think going back to showing again who's struggling the most, who historically has been struggling the most, who struggled even more during the pandemic. We're looking at the data. I mentioned Black male students before, and looking at the data, because we break out the data and progress monitoring in subgroups. And that's extremely important because it gives you a very close look at what's going on. Some school systems have a goal, those who are doing student outcomes focused governance, and even a version thereof, around making sure Black males are reading on grade level by 3rd grade. I think if we did that, that would be hugely transformative for those students. And I think that's something, there's even a more critical need to do that now, with the pandemic having occurred to the extent it did, and with the effects. Like, if we're not working on the front end, it's just going to get worse going down the line. And then I think a lot about students in high school, like what's going on for them. I have 2 high schoolers who are very candid in their feedback about what's going on for their peers. Mental health is real. And having that safe place at school. I recognize schools can't do everything, and I don't expect educators to do everything for every student. That is not fair. but we do have, again, providers that we need to make sure are really supporting our students in the mental health area. And then, how we go into the community and talk about the importance of these things with partners like Fulton County Health, which I'm glad they finally have a bus going around saying it's okay to not be okay. But we hear from our students saying these are our needs, but like my parents don't understand the importance of mental health services. Like they don't trust that. Totally understandable. But we have to get real about these things being a barrier and how APS helps in having those community conversations to break these things down. I also think that builds trust in the community. It shows that we care, and that we're going out meeting people. So when it comes to the pandemic, I think about those things that really do affect how our students are doing. And again, going back to violence prevention and interruption, the trauma from all that, just increasing difficulty for families and circumstances, and having even safe places out in our community and obviously always in our schools for students, and how we build in those resources in schools that need them the most. So yeah, those are areas that I'm always thinking about. But again, I go back to our goals and our guardrails. I think they need to be narrowed, particularly our goals. I think our guardrails are pretty good, but they talk about climate and culture, stakeholder engagement, innovation, delivery. Those are key things, and equity, which is making sure your students have what they need to be successful. It's not about equality, which means you focus your resources on doing those things where the need is greatest. So I think we're doing a lot of that now, but it's sometimes spread so thin that we're sometimes not focusing in as much as we need to on what's really working.
Okay. That was an in-depth answer, but I
Yeah.
love I love the response.
Good. Well, I go
Because
into
you're thinking about it more than one way, and how it's affecting the entire child, not just the child sitting before the teacher in the classroom. So to me, that's very important, and certainly important for the community to hear, is that you're not just sitting on the board taking up a seat. You're actually working and thinking about what you're doing, as opposed to just occupying a seat on the board. So I appreciate that, and I'm certain that your community. Oh, I shouldn't say just not just your community, but all of them, because I appreciate it, and I'm not in District 1 like that, but I love coming to the meeting because I like to see the interaction and the things that you're actually bringing to the board for your constituents. Mm-hmm. And to you, they're just not people who live in a district, but they're people. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's personable, and that means a lot to me. And I'm certain it means a lot to other people just as well. So, with that being said, you identified some things that happened over the pandemic, and you acknowledged that the effects of the pandemic was great. Be it on whatever it may have been, it affected all of us. And so there's no denying that. We don't take that back. We kind of have to own it, right? And so with that being said, you changed my focus, but I'm going to go here. Mm-hmm. And I brought this up before, and you were talking about also, you made a statement that made me go to truancy, mm-hmm. and attendance, mm-hmm. and looking at the conditions of the people in the community, which is forcing people to mm-hmm. have to make sacrifices and to adjust to this new way of living, and taking on responsibilities that they may not have had otherwise, which is mm-hmm. why I think Atlanta is seeing their number down, the student population down mm-hmm. in the school. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question to you is as relates to policies, what policies do you see right now that are in place that are adverse or non-productive, or mm-hmm. Just don't effectively address the disproportionate discipline and suspension rate of boys, mm-hmm. Of students that are mm-hmm. in schools in economically challenged areas, and more specifically, those who have documented disabilities?
Yes, I'm glad you brought it up. The area of student discipline is got to be a major focus for us. And I've actually asked for a presentation that speaks to what we're doing around our students who are most at risk. And this absolutely fits into it, like the students who are being suspended, and that we know are the hardest to reach sometimes. I will say, in terms of our policies right now, that needs a deep dive look. And I'm learning a lot from people who have been working in this space. I appreciated Sterling at the Southern Center for Partnership for Equity, and him bringing up issues that we know exist in terms of how Black students are suspended at a higher rate proportionally than white students. It is a fact. And I have gone to trainings and other places where I've, heard from people doing the work to reach students who are dealing with a lot of different difficulties in their lives or whatever may be going on. The importance of asking the why and putting in place things to make sure kids don't get to that point. And then how are we making sure that we're supporting educators so that, they are able to manage their classrooms, but this is not where we're going. Like we know suspension doesn't work. We know when kids aren't in school, they're not learning and they're just going back to whatever probably caused them to get into a situation to begin with.
Exactly.
But also, but have we really put in place strategies and supports for people to not have that as an alternative or an option? No. And it really takes that intentional look to say, okay, what can we do in our schools? Like, what do we do at each level, elementary, middle, and high? In middle school, like, do we have teams that go in, support teams that, work with students who are struggling, who seem to have behavioral issues, whatever it may be. It could be, honestly, that they're struggling to read or something else is going on at home or all these other factors that we're going to need some support to address because educators can't do it all. And I want us to really unpack what's going on in the Office of Student Discipline. I would like the word discipline taken out of that office, and it is support services, but like working with the DA's office and others that are, meeting kids where they are, and also have those authentic messengers who can really connect with students who are in this space. It is not going to be somebody like me. Why would a student in that situation listen to me? I don't blame them. I don't know what I'm talking about. I can't relate to their experience,
Right.
but I can support the right people being in that place to meet them where they are. And the good news is, too, we have some organizations doing this work. Thrive is at Washington. They're at Douglas. They're going into Carver. They do life skills. They do social emotional. They do a lot of work to support students in that space. So they're not getting into a situation where they could be suspended. So it's like you have the triage of like, how do we really stop this and know what's going on? Which we had a good report the other day or the other month, from the Office of Student Services. And they're acknowledging like, this is what's happening and this is how we're trying to break things up to address the situation immediately, but also like, how do you plan long-term for kids to not even get there? And the reality is too, I've heard from families about the appeals process for situations, and we need to make sure that process is clearly spelled out for families, that they know their rights and options. And then if there is something that might be better for a student, like Hand Care and New Beginnings, people understand why that might be a good option for a bit to take a student out of a situation that wasn't healthy too. So first, being real about what's going on and not sugarcoating anything. And then, letting the superintendent and team come up with some strategies to address these things with partners, and us talk with the superintendent, ask questions, make sure we fully understand and we're providing the feedback of the realities so they can adjust and pivot, and then supporting that with the budget. That's hugely important. And then, yes, included in that are people who are working in these spaces with families and students who are in these situations. We have got to work with them. Like and it's a Southern Partnership for Equity. They're doing this work. We need to partner with them. We need to work with them to say, okay, you guys are really focused on this issue, and how can we work with you to help address it? Because everybody should be focused on making sure like we don't have any suspensions ever. And where we meeting kids and coming up with alternatives to anything like that, because it does not work. But also knowing that we need to have accountability for everybody.
And I agree with you, the accountability piece, but in my personal opinion, I think that APS has defined an effective way of capturing issues and identifying resources that would best address those issues. And then once you effectuate those resources, to find out also whether or not those resources are effective in addressing the issues that you identified the first time, not necessarily a different issue, which is often what we see. You know, and sometimes, you know, we teach children how to write, but they never learn how to write in cursive. And so we say, oh, that's good. But the idea is to get them right in cursive. So I appreciate you saying that, because to me that speaks to the real issue. Which is I have two issues, which is going to bring me to I'm telling you, you're working me today. So I appreciate that.
Love it.
But I am thinking about, you know, I'm all for children with special needs. Students with disability is where I'm going to go. And I'm going to always be there because that is my heart. And that's because I do have one, and I want to make certain that those children who are often forgotten and who are often overlooked and who are often marginalized and who are always, I should say, I mean, I say always, but who are often viewed last, I want them to be a part of this conversation. I asked a question on whether or not, you know, on the Student Outcome Governance Committee, if they had someone who was representative of a student with disability. They said, well, Ms. Sherrill, those students are really good and they support the students with disability. They talk about that. But I don't want you to just talk about it. I want you to embrace them. Because you'd be surprised, you know, how many abilities that students with disabilities have. You know, and I say to everybody, even ones we consider to not have any disabilities have them. We just do things differently in order to make adjustments. And so I want people to start viewing that and start looking at inclusivity, not just in word, but in deeds. Truly include. And it could be somebody who is not my color. I don't care who it is. I've never used color. I've always used disability, because that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at what will make you independent in the long run. And that's why we want to go, because we're looking for everybody in the city to be a productive citizen in the city, so that the entire city can grow, so the entire state can grow, and the United States can grow. Not just us, but we're talking about us against them, not just one sector. You know what I mean? And so I often hear, oh, Midtown has it all. That's not true. And I often hear that we're going to take away from Midtown because it's disproportionate. I get that. I get that you look at it and say, okay, you know, here's a community that has resources. That community may have resources, but they had to do just like everybody else, build. And I think if we were to partner with all schools, we could build all communities so that we all can have the same thing and be going the same direction, as opposed to tugging and pulling against each other. Which brings me to my point. My next point is, you know, I don't hear anything about the GNET schools, and I consider them to be something separate than the students with disability who are in the building of regular classrooms and gen ed classes, or even in our special units.
Mm.
But what are we going to do to help those children and those families understand where they are? Because when you said a moment ago when you were talking about places, and you said that we're going to take what we're doing to the community. But I'm wondering, when we get back to that Gina, I'm wondering if it would be beneficial if APS took the issue out to the community first, heard the community feedback, and then come back and develop a plan around that feedback, even though you've already come up with the issue. You know what I'm saying? You pretty much have what you need to do and what we would like to see done. But the community can help you kind of fine tune that before you come back with an actual plan to the community. And then you get this, wait, they're not for me, they're for them.
Mm-hmm.
And, I see that a lot in our meetings where, community members are fighting against themselves.
Yeah.
Because ultimately it's your tax dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, we elect people like you to represent us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to fight against you. I want to support you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I can't sit on the board in your seat because you're already sitting there. So I am just wondering, what are we doing? What are we doing, or what can we do to help those children that are not in sight and out of sight and often not thought about? What can we do for them, and what can we do for their families?
Absolutely. I appreciate everything you just shared and asked. I do want to say that it's on the school system to always be focused on those students and their families. No child should ever be left behind. That is the job of a school system, and the job of Board of Education is to improve student outcomes, all students. That's our job. It's not to do constituent service and fix something for one person. It is to serve all students well and prepare them for life after school. And that absolutely includes our students who have different ways of learning and their unique, definitely superpowers, because they are skilled and talented in so many different ways. And being that it is called special education still today, which is, they are special. And I know that Dr. Battle is very focused on the area and understanding exactly what's going on right now with her expertise and experience and knowledge, and her staff to do that deep dive needs assessment in that area. The board's job is, when we understand what's going on, and she says we need to focus on these things that align with our goals, because our goals are really too broad, but at the same time,
Right.
they encompass every child too. So nobody gets left out in that, and nobody ever will, even when we know our goals. I mean, by doing that work, we're allowing for more things in space to be tied, or money to be tied up, even, released even to support other areas like special education. I think we need to really focus in special education to make sure all our students are benefiting from educators who have a lot of experience and are broadening opportunities for those students, that we're thinking outside the box, especially, for our neurodiverse students. When we heard the Tapestry application for their charter, what I kept thinking about is there is no reason APS cannot do this. We have the resources, but we need to train people in the right way. They need to know the most effective, most current approaches. Again, we have people with good intentions, but they don't have the right support and really know how to best support our students who are unique in their way of learning. Then we are letting those students down. And we're actually letting those educators down too, because we haven't prepared them best. We haven't set them up for success. So that deep dive needs assessment has to be done. And that is something that the board needs to always push to have done. Like, we need to know what's going on and what the superintendent is doing to address our needs. You mentioned a lot of things too that related back to stakeholder engagement, and I could not agree more. And making sure we are engaging the community on the work we're doing, and we're updating them constantly. We have not been doing that. A part of student outcomes focused governance is for us to go out collectively into the community and talk about, okay, here are goals, here are guardrails, this is what it means, here's what we've done, and where do you think we are on these? And by getting that feedback, that helps us know, okay, how do we need to adjust?
Right.
For one, how does the superintendent, who would be there as well with team, how could they start potentially pivoting? And for us, in terms of how, when we go to reset goals, because they last 5 years and we're getting up on the expiration, how are we going to change them and adjust them? Because the goals are supposed to reflect the community's vision, what they want to see students know and be able to do. And the guardrails are the values. They're important as well in terms of what we cannot allow to exist in our system, and the superintendent cannot allow it to exist in order to accomplish our goals. And that goes back, like equity being one. They have to do it in a way that's providing students with the resources they need. So that's huge. And we need to be measuring that. And we are, but we need to do better about measuring that constantly and going out in the community and talking about that. So we get the very feedback you're sharing, where people feel like, or you are expressing, which I completely agree with. We feel like some students are still left behind. And what are we doing about that? And we need to talk about that and have actions we're taking, and start with, we acknowledge this is where we are. But yes, I mean, this is not to knock people again individually for doing the work they're doing, because they're working so hard. But we know there are new approaches that have got to be implemented for our students who learn in different ways. So I'm from, students who have significant needs around just their learning environment, to kids who just need another approach to just even feel welcomed. And making sure parents know that those, and families know those resources, and guardians too, are available, and breaking down stigma around even having their children assessed to be eligible for some of these resources. I tell people all the time, APS has so much to offer, and you want to take advantage of everything they have to offer, and not think your child's going to be labeled a certain way if they receive information or additional support in an area. That is hugely valuable, but we've got to work to really break down misconceptions around some things that people think is not setting their child up for success, when in fact it could actually really empower their child to be an even better equipped learner lifelong.
Right. I guess this is not a question at the moment, but has APS thought about having or permitting parents to be parent mentors? I know we have a parent liaison, and Etha Bakri was a part of that committee, and I know we have Keisha, who's on that side too. But have the board thought about, and I know we do background checks, so I'm for all that, to make certain that we get parents in who's not gonna be a harm to our children, let's put it that way, or harm to the environment. I'm not asking a parent to be a scholar, and or a doctor of any sort, just somebody who can help mentor someone that has a student like theirs, who they can identify with and feel more comfortable with. And so I do hope that we can go back and have a look at policies and resources as relates to students that are in the GNET schools and those environments, because I know if my son fell through the crack and I was there, so I think the crack was intentionally placed, but that's just my personal opinion based on what I saw. Yeah. I know that those students who I hear nothing when I go to meetings about those, as if that's a separate entity that belongs to somebody else. And I know they belong to us. And so I'm just wondering, how they are faring, and what do we expect as a school district if we are creating students or a roadway from the school to the prison. And what do we expect when we talk about truancy and absenteeism, and students having to take it upon themselves, to get an income, to provide for themselves and their family members, so to speak. So I just don't understand what we expect to get if we're not willing to listen to each other. If we're not willing to realize that we're not all perfect. And we don't pretend to have the answer to every question. And that everybody is unique in their own rights, and that we can understand and learn from each other. That's the part I want to see us do, because parents, we speak about community engagement a lot. I mean, and right now, I can tell you this is not the first time, but lately, since you've been on the board, we've had communication that's come out. Now it's got much better since, in the last, I would say in the last 4 years. And we're talking about all these wonderful things that are in the community, but we're still not bringing parents in. So why we're not seeing that engagement from the community? So what do you see as a barrier and a contributing factor? And what would you do differently your next term around?
Well, going back to the realities, I mean, that's part of this deep dive needs assessment, like you're pointing out. I mean, from kids not showing up to school, kids not being engaged, to how do we really reach families? And understanding, okay, what's going on, and then saying, okay, how do we shift this? What do we think are creating these barriers? And a large part of that, obviously, is communicating with families. For instance, the importance of having your child at school every day, not sending a letter saying, you're in violation or you're in trouble, because that doesn't well. It creates a lot of consternation for people. But how do we really outreach to families, and how do we put in the people in place who can do that work and meet people where they are? I'm glad you brought up Keisha Copeland. I think that's who you're talking about with family engagement. Yes, I think she does an incredible job. And there are people within her office who are very connected to the realities on the ground in the schools they're serving. And we have to really support them. And when they say, we're seeing this is needed, like having more, they don't even have to necessarily be a parent liaison, but more people who, let's say, and even the North Atlanta cluster, and applies to South Atlanta too, in an office who speaks Spanish. Like, that is a big deal for families coming in who need to understand things. Like, that is something you're probably going to need to put in place. And when it's relayed to the district by these people, that needs to happen. And my job is not to manage all that. I'm not in operations, but my job is to, say, we're seeing this data, we're seeing this as being an issue. District, you're identifying it too. Who and what are you putting in place to address it? And that would be an example of one of those things. Like, if I'm not doing that, then I keep going back and saying, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing? In the budget, when it comes to the budget needs to align with those needs. That makes sure they happen. It's not enough to say we want to do it. You got to place the money and lock it in. Really, if boards don't see budgets that align with the goals and really produce those strategies, we should send it back to the superintendent.
I agree.
And I was frustrated last time. I did vote for the budget because I definitely wanted to support pay increases for teachers and staff. But we hadn't teed it up right as a board to say, this needs to be aligned with our goals. Like, we're still new to this process, understanding that, but it has to be a shift. And a superintendent has to drive that too. A superintendent has to lay out the strategy. And I'm looking forward to October being the month, and Dr. Battle's coming to us with a work session, yes, to really talk about these things. But you're bringing up examples of issues that we need to really hear what they're doing to address them.
Exactly.
And you said that we don't all know everything. That's true. Like, we're gonna put in place some things that may not work out, and honestly, that is okay, because you need to start trying some things that are different to have some success too. Like, you may fail forward a little bit, but at least you're moving forward and you're not stagnant and going backwards.
Right,
You
right.
you pivot and adjust. And it's important the superintendent have in place a team that can really do this work. So we're going to see the results of that team not doing that work in the data and what we're looking at. And the data is not just testing, it is all these things we are looking at that we're talking about today. And then also for board members, being out in the community and listening to our constituents. I try to do everything I can, and there's still more I could do. But I find sometimes just being in settings, like I'm going to Ben Teen's Fall Festival, and I don't know exactly who will come to that community fall festival, but it's a great opportunity for me to be around families, hopefully, there and listen. And just make sure I build relationships with people I know who know what's going on the ground, and just being available to talk in an informal way and really get feedback from folks and make sure that I'm providing that. And then I'm pushing in from a larger lens district wide. But there's nothing better also than being out in the community and hearing from families and engaging with students.
Right.
And I did want to mention one other thing. I think you're talking about like a representative from students who do have special needs. With the Student Advisory Council, is that who you're referring to?
And this is student
Having a
governance. The Student Governance Council, yes.
Yep. So that, I'm glad you brought that up. I think they do a good job of representing their schools, but I agree. I think it'd be wonderful to have somebody, students who are in receiving special education services and can definitely represent that special population of students and then their unique needs and how we do a better job of even giving them more experience.
Well, I have to say, it's a thing for me. That's an issue close to my heart based on my son, and other students and other families that I've dealt with. So I appreciate you saying that, and kudos to you for going out in the community and feeling the feelings that are coming behind the words from people who are being served by you. So I appreciate that. And I think that we do have to look at this closely, because again, I'm going to bring up what I always bring up. And take this back to the board, because this is not happening. We need a target class of 2022, because those children students were in the pandemic the longest, and they received the least amount of supports. And if we're seeing the remnants in the school setting now, those children are out here in the community. What effects do you think y'all seeing in the community? Is you're seeing the same thing in the community that you're seeing in the classrooms? And so I am saying that we are going to miss a generation of students who would have and could have contributed to society, but for the lack of help or support, I should say. And I think we should have extended them the opportunity to at least be supported in the area, whether it be getting job support, just additional tutoring to kind of steer them in a direction that will be supportive of them in the community, so they can be productive. Just in areas like that, let's forget educating them again, because most of them probably wouldn't come back to the school setting now that you've gotten out, right? Once you get that taste of freedom, you don't want to go back.
Right.
But I think that it would benefit the city, it would benefit the school system, and it would put Atlanta on the map at saying, hey, wait a minute. We realize that not only the babies that we're serving right now, because that's what I call them students, but the students that we let go who didn't master literacy, but they were graduated out based on the fact that they had just kind of credits. That is contributing to what we're seeing now in our city. And we're wondering, the homeless population have gone up. You're seeing the violence have gone up, and the difference in violence is there now.
Mhm.
We have creative violence. Who's ever heard of that before? Creative violence.
That's kind of yes.
Yeah, okay. Say go figure. So and so which brings me, I know you have to go, but which brings me to your experience. You know, you have two children, I think you said.
Mhm.
And you know that children don't always they don't always express what they're feeling on a daily basis.
Mhm.
And it may come up in just a, a casual conversation, maybe over some chocolate, hot chocolate you're having one day. So I want to know how do you prepare your colleagues, um, based on your seat, to
Mhm.
understand the importance of a binding contract such as the IEP, individualized education plan for students who are protected by federal law.
Mhm.
How can you ensure that those students are receiving a valid IEP and related services? I know we do it based on numbers and what people tell us, but I've seen I've seen numbers, I've seen reports, but I want you to tell the community how will you go back and have a conversation with the board members and in understanding that an IEP is a binding contract, and that those students that are into that contract are protected by federal law. How would you handle that one?
Well, I know all my colleagues understand that, and that has to be done. Um, and IEPs have to be taken very seriously, and there needs to be a lot of support around that. I mean, you've got to have someone who understands what that means and what that entails, and knows how to differentiate and learning, or making sure that learning is taking place. And then, of course, a teacher's responsible for that. I think a lot of it comes back to what is the district doing to support that happening in the right way. And that is absolutely under operations and us making sure that's happening, because that 100% impacts student outcomes. So I certainly get reports from families who feel like their IEP is not being fully implemented and supported, and I pass that directly along. And I also remind folks, the people at the district work for you. Like, contact them. Always, you can always easily go to Let's Talk. We need to even make that more accessible. But yes, I mean, it's up to us working with the superintendent to make sure that as a district, we are absolutely doing everything we've got to do to best support students, which includes IEPs. There's definitely data around that her team can look at to understand like what is going on the ground. We know some students are very well supported in that area, and there may be some that are not, for a variety of reasons. But it all goes back to who is administering it and where's the accountability, and making sure, and that conversation with a parent, caregiver, family member, around what support they can even provide outside of school. And that's a huge part of it too. You also talked about obviously our students who've graduated, who are so heavily impacted towards the end of their education by the pandemic. WorkSource and other entities supporting those adults and getting what they need to, have the job they want, to be productive. That's important. We have those partners in the city. And for us, with our students who are still in APS, I am glad we have the graduation rate we do, but we need to really know what our students are able to do when they graduate.
So let me
They're
ask
really
you.
prepared.
So let me ask you. You said you have those partners who are working with students who've already graduated, or you just
Well,
said in
WorkSource,
general?
WorkSource is a great example. Like,
Right.
they're the entity, City of Atlanta, and they get federal funding to train people, to help them, move on. Like, I know they connect them with, I think, GED courses. I mean, there are entities doing this work.
So,
Um,
but is APS providing that to families and sending families that in that direction. And I'm asking that because I don't, I don't know what side of town you live on, but I know that we see students who are roaming the streets or hanging the corners, right?
You know, current students or people who graduated?
No, graduated.
And technically they're not students anymore.
No, they're not. They're not.
No.
But APS sent them out into the world ill prepared, and so now they are part of our community. And you mentioned workforce, but I'm saying, is that something? Okay, if I'm saying so, is APS actively and sending them in that direction? Because and the reason why I'm asking this question, I guess the reason why I'm making this claim is because I've talked to some other board members, and so APS is well aware that students in the class of, and specifically, I wasn't talking about anybody else, specifically the class of 2022 left ill prepared. I mean, that's just a fact. And we know that based on what we're seeing now with the students who came back after the pandemic and sitting in the classrooms. And one of the things I found to be ironic when you were talking about that was they published the graduation rates for 2022, right? Mm-hmm. In those graduation rates, and I'm going to look at it so you see me looking. I'm not ignoring you, but I look that one thing at a time thing. I have got to do, okay. But what I found to be ironic is that for the first time since 2014, that in the year of 22, that we had Black students that graduated more even. I mean, doesn't matter what the rate was. The mere fact that you saw an increase since 2014 to 82.2% from 80.6% in 2021. And so we said we had the highest graduation rate. I think I had light on, but anyway, I apologize for that. We had the highest graduation rate in the class of 2022. And I asked are those numbers authentic? Are the grades authentic? And are we aware that when children were at home in the pandemic, they had Siri, they had Alexa, they had Google, they had their phones, their laptops, and anything that spoke, anything that could copy and paste. But what you're seeing is that numbers went up, but are you seeing them at a level in college? Are you seeing them at a level higher than entry level on jobs? Are you seeing them gravitate towards civic engagements in their own communities? You see what I'm saying? So we let them go, not support it, but to look at the number in 2014, we're talking about Black students who graduated at the rate of 57.4%. They wrote in the last, what's that, almost 10 years, we're now at 82.2%, the highest that you've seen. Really?
So that's why I'm so glad we have a goal on post-graduation readiness, because we need to get real about our students being prepared to leave and do whatever they want to do, career-wise, college-wise. For instance, I know students who graduated last year who have already left their schools because they were not fully prepared for what that looked like going. And we need to have a life skills curriculum. I firmly believe this, which would align with our post-graduation readiness. And doing that age appropriately in elementary, middle, and high school.
Yes.
And drawing from things we know that are working. I mean, Drew has a great college and career center. I mean, it's really focused on college, but it really works with students early on about, like, if you're thinking about college, this is a pathway, we're setting you up for that success. Like, going to college is being put into a whole nother world, especially for first generation students.
Yes.
You great to partner even with Georgia State on this, because they have the highest graduation rate for first generation college students, because they put in place all these things to support students the entire way.
Right.
Also, KIPP, they have a great students center, support center that's looking at college and beyond. These are things the students bring up
Right.
because they know what's working. So I go back to our goals, because in measuring our goals, we should really be looking in at where we know we have gaps and deficits. Like, if, to your point, we're going to have to track some of that data when students leave. It isn't, and there's been talk about how to get that data. There are people working on that, and it's not like that, but it's possible. And that's where we as board members need to push in, because that's also being innovative and doing something different than we've been doing, because people honestly have been like, you're gone, not in a cold way. It's just like, we graduated you, but we've got to make sure that we have that information to build in how we best support kids, students, for whatever path they choose, and knowing there are going to be a lot of non-traditional ways, and there should be.
Right.
Just because you don't start out going to college when you graduate doesn't mean you won't go to college.
Exactly.
You also don't want to set somebody up to actually have more difficulty to continue college because they struggled so much their first year.
Exactly.
I couldn't agree more. So again, and that's why I want to tailor some of our goals more narrowly to say, okay, if we're going to create a curriculum for life skills, like, how are we committing resources to that? If we're going to commit to having college and career centers at every school, maybe, I don't know if that's the right choice. I'm just putting that out there.
Right.
How do we show resources to that? So
well, ironically, you mentioned about capturing what happens after school, high school. That information is actually captured by schools and sent into the state. So that may be something y'all want to look at and have.
Yeah, they have some, but like, they don't have all.
But at least and they may not be authentic either. But I'm just saying, but at least it's there, and it gives you a place to start, as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely, we need to take every data point there is, the ones
right,
and then say, okay, we're a system of like 50,000 kids. This is not impossible, and not all graduate. Like, that's a smaller number. There are ways, but that's the thing that I think is exciting for APS too. Like, we can be more nimble than Gwinnett or Cobb or DeKalb. They're huge. We don't have any excuses to not do some of this stuff. We also have a $1.66 billion budget. So
there you go.
But you need to be real about, like, where are those buckets of money? I mean, we spend a lot on transportation. Like, there are a lot of things that we've kept status quo, and we're gonna have to be honest about how we adjust and pivot, and maybe like focus in with our resources, one of which being people are the most valuable. So, but I look forward to all those conversations in the 4 years I have coming, and how we really do this work with community, because they're a critical piece of this. That's how you know what's really going on, and you know what's working. And obviously looking, number one, at our students.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. But I implore you to have a serious conversation with, and when I say serious, it doesn't necessarily mean y'all got to sit down and put on your game face, but just have a conversation to realize that we're all working this thing together, and that it is important for all of us to have feedback and to take away things. But again, I think that if the board would come up with issues or find issues and then come out to the community and get their points and then go back and brainstorm, I think they will feel more engaged, as opposed to you bringing the entire solution to them and resolving it for them and then asking them, okay, what do you think? Nobody wants to do that, except for, when you have children, you can do that with your children. No, I drive, you sit in the passenger seat. And to me, and a number of other community members, it feels like that's what's happening, is that, you're coming back with a solution already, and then wanting us to accept what you're bringing back. So I just want to say from me to you, I support you. And if you need me to go to a school with you, to hear a parent that has an IEP or a student with a disability, please, you don't have to call me. You can text Miss Sherrill, okay?
Yeah, well, text me. Like, if you hear of a situation, I think Waukesha has my number. It's on my email. It's out everywhere. like just text
But we
me.
want you still, we still want you to drop your information in this chat.
Yeah,
if you
I'll do
can.
it. I'm
So
happy
people,
to.
yes, because we're gonna make sure we
Yep.
share it with the community
Mhm.
and speak you up as we go along this way.
Well,
We
thank
know
you. I
that,
just
we know that early voting starts when?
16th
Yep.
Okay. And again, you're representing what district?
council. Good gracious, excuse me. Board of Education District 1, which is mainly half of Carver cluster, all of the Maynard Jackson cluster, except for I do not have East Atlanta and I do not have Kirkwood. That's in Board of Education District 3. And then Midtown High School, so Midtown, portion of Virginia Highlands, Old Fourth Ward. I think that's it for that feeds into Midtown. But and Old Ponce Highlands, that section. So yes, people need to pay attention to this election. So thank you all. Everyone's going to have 4 people to vote for your district, and I'm sorry, 3 people. Excuse me, 3 people. Your district and your 2 at-larges. So the 7 and 9.
There you go. That's what I'm talking
exactly.
about. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. This was a really good conversation. I'm gonna share this out. We're gonna get your information out so people know. And we just trying to make sure people are aware that, hey, y'all, I know it's a little off, but it's an election coming up. And if you're watching the replay, go check Katie out. You heard her, Miss Sherelle. This was very in-depth. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Miss Sherelle. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Katie. She's doing the work.
Yes.
Well, y'all doing the work also.
But I've been seeing you out in the community, so I know you're doing the work. You're not just sitting there. How your grandma say you're not just another cute face. She's actually doing the work. Okay. So go and check her out. And just because she's the only one on the ballot, don't mean you don't need to vote. Show your support.
That's right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate
it. You have a good one, Katie. This has really been dope. I appreciate you hopping on for sure.
Yes.
I appreciate y'all. It's been dope for me too. Appreciate y'all. Have a good night.
No, you as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank y'all. Take care. Good night.